Middle of Genre, the show for readers who think they're starting the exciting new installment of the Saw horror film series, but then realize they're sorely mistaken with the Jigsaw Man. Oof, that was a stretch. What else we got?
A+.
We are reading every short story in Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Visions anthology, and boy, it ain't easy. This time we are reading Larry Niven's The Jigsaw Man. I'm Zach. This week I am really interested in how much do SF authors owe their readers in terms of narrative versus, I guess you could say, grand concept. What is the proper mix between the two?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm Bob. I'm interested in the urgency Larry Niven seems to be writing with. And I think he's only 23 or 25 writing this story. So I'm really interested in his fears as an author and the way he's using science fiction, hard science fiction as he claims it is, and how he's expressing these fears.
A lot of urgency in this one. That's a really good point that I think I didn't put my finger on mentally. But yeah, this is... As far as, like, we've read SF before that comes across as a warning about what could possibly happen in the future. But this, I think, is the most pressing warning so far. Bob, what happened in the story?
So it's a fun story, actually. It's pretty fun. There is a guy who's in jail. He's in jail. And we don't know exactly what he's done. He's there. There's two people on the side of him. One is a teenager and one is an old man. And the old man says, "Hey, look at that kid over there. Do you know why he's here?" And he explains that this kid is I guess what would you call him, a body snatcher. He goes and he kidnaps people to then sell them so someone can harvest their organs. And the old guy is saying, "Look, I'm going to bust you out of here. You're going to go with me," or they're going to kill each other so they won't be harvested. But he says, "I've got a bomb in my leg." And of course, our narrator is saying, "What? How did you put a bomb in your leg?" He says, "Trust me, stand right next to this wall." And he says, "No." And he keeps backing up. Then nothing happens at all. And he says, "Oh, I was stupid to believe it." Then suddenly, boom, and the guy explodes. There's a huge hole in the wall. And now he is able to escape. And the man, before he blows up, confesses that he is the guy who was buying the organs and sending the kid out. But he explodes himself. Now our guy is trying to escape this building. He finds out that their prison is actually at the very top of a skyscraper. And as he's getting out, he goes on kind of a catwalk between two buildings, narrowly misses his death, and ends up in a hospital. Then, while in the hospital, going down the elevator, the doors open and he sees all of these tanks. And he's wondering, what on earth are these tanks? They are tanks full of organs. They are full of all kinds of different people's organs. So he goes, he smashes the tanks, reveals to us that he has always been opposed to, organ farming, and goes to jail again. And that's basically, is that about right?
Yeah. The only nitpick I would have would be it's not organ farming as much as it is organ harvesting, organ recycling.
Harvesting, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true, yes. And then they store it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I would imagine like farming, you'd have like petri dishes with stem cells and they're growing kidneys or something. But that's not quite exactly what he's worried about. In fact, I think he would view that as like the best thing to ever happen, because in his view, the worst thing to ever happen is the fact that we discover that there are different blood types. Why this is important, why this is the worst thing in the world, is that discovering that there are different blood types enables doctors to understand why when you move the organs from one body to another body, sometimes they're accepted and other times they're outright rejected.
I think it's a really interesting way to start this story, the way that Niven does it, because he is interested in what, hard sci-fi. And what he gives himself are these premises. Like you said, it says, the very beginning says, in AD 1900, Carl Landsteiner, and then he explains about different blood types and how transfusions, now we can make them happen without killing people. Then he gives a kind of science fiction start where he's saying now people are starting to arrest anyone. They've gotten rid of the death penalty until they realized the death penalty can get them lots and lots of organs. And now this is where his fear and his terror comes from, is this historically based start. Then he jumps off with his science fiction before. Have you seen any science fiction like that, where it's a real premise right from the start?
No, to be honest with you. This is something that I think we could classify as an alternative history.
Counterfactual.
A counterfactual.
Maybe alternative history better, yeah.
What about you? Can you think of anything that we've read? God, you think 150 episodes, we have to have read something that uses this ploy.
I can't think of anything. The ones that we've seen are all reasonable. I mean, they're possible, like the Butlerian Jihad. We've got too many thinking machines. We need to kill all of the thinking machines. And that's based on something, I guess, 100 years before, when Erewhon and Samuel Butler writes Erewhon 100 years before Dune around. So that is historically based. It's an idea from history.
Well, the interesting thing is that it's so iconoclastic, so contrarian, because if you did a poll on the street, if you walked around and asked 100 different people if they thought that organ transplants were a good or a bad thing, I couldn't imagine a single person would tell you that they thought it was a bad thing. But for him, what he sees as the inevitable direction that organ transplants will go is that you will have people who are sentenced to capital punishment, sentenced to death, have their organs harvested from them upon their execution. And what he sees as happening is that the organs of the criminals will be able to extend the lifespan of the law-abiding citizens almost indefinitely, he explicitly says. Seems a little outlandish, but he seems to think that the criminal organs could make us all live forever so long as we obey the law. However, in doing so, what will happen on a society-wide level is that the bar for the death penalty will drop and drop and drop and drop to the most minor infraction will now be punished by death, because you got to keep the spice flowing, and by spice I mean kidneys. So he views this as inevitable, and he doubles down on it in his afterword. He's like, this is what will happen, and it's a miracle that it hasn't happened already, but it's like he views it as a historical certainty. And that, to me, is the most interesting part. What do you think of his absolute prophetic certainty that this is where society will go?
I was very interested in it. I think that's a big part of the urgency we talked about earlier, and maybe some paranoia. We saw with Philip K. Dick that there might be a hint of paranoia in sci-fi, or at least writing about dystopian fiction. And this, the paranoia is deep. In the afterword, he says, someone has to start thinking about this, and we haven't much time. It's only an accident of history that Red Cross blood banks aren't supplied by the death house. Think of the advantages. And worry. That's how he ends the afterword. So this is a deep fear, and I guess it's a prediction of a very dangerous vision.
Is it a problem for you in science fiction if it makes a prediction and that prediction has not come true?
No, I don't think so. Not at all.
Let me counter that. Let me give a few examples here, because there's science fiction that offers a view of a potential world. 1984 offers a potential world. If these things go wrong, then, or if the world continues, then this is what the world will be like. Or maybe we'll offer something that doesn't have any explicit connection to our world, like Dune, for example. What if we created a new setting where these kind of innate tendencies that we see in humans are allowed to run wild, and we can give them a playground to go out on stage. But with this one, there's really an act of prophecy happening here. This is what will happen in the future. And it just so happens to be wrong.
Yeah. However, it's not like Nostradamus where you get a very particular year. This will happen in this year. I feel like he's saying it could happen any day now, and it should have already happened. How we're lucky that it hasn't yet. And the ideas are fair. I mean, if someone is in power and they want the one class to live for a longer period of time, and it's also mutually convenient to put more people in jail and to put more people to death, it totally could happen. So I think it's not a false prediction. It's just, it could still happen, Zach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm speaking out of turn because I don't actually know anything about this, but wasn't this really the argument against harvesting stem cells from unborn children?
Was this like the argument, or did this have a relationship with the argument?
Wasn't this the argument that they were going to use stem cells from terminated pregnancies to heal wounds or heal diseases, heal disorders in people? And I think that there was a huge political backlash against that when that was on the table.
That could very well be. I know that there's a big religious backlash against it too, as it being unnatural. And I think that was where a lot of the voters were. So it might have been more fringe to think about, think of the social repercussions. But I mean, that's I don't know. But it does seem very, like, the state would have to be very dark. Like the guy who was arrested, as you said, the bar gets lower and lower and lower for why you are arrested and given the death sentence. And I think he has, 3 parking violations and 2 speeding tickets, something like that. And he's been given the death penalty. So things have to be looking pretty bad. The government itself would have to look pretty bad for this to happen. But there would be nothing stopping a government already that bad. As long as the technology's there, they can make it happen.
Sure.
He says in the afterword or in the introduction, I think he says, human technology can change human morals. Do you think that is true? We talked about maybe science fiction leading technology when we read Philip K. Dick. This is technology leading human morals. And it made me think, you mentioned Herbert a minute ago. And I was thinking the same thing. Is this what Herbert was warning against? Technology becoming too smart, and we have to have a Butlerian jihad to get rid of all of it. And then also, the warning of axolotl tanks and how horrifying that is. Do you think that Larry Niven and Frank Herbert are doing kind of a similar project, a similar prophetic warning here?
That's a really good connection to make. And I think that the idea that technology what was the verb you used? Is it drives morals, or is it defines morals? He says,
this is from Niven. He says, human technology can change human morals.
Can change morals, yeah. Yeah, I think that is very, very wise. Very wise. I'm trying to think of a good, solid, real-world example in which technology has changed morals. I can't think of one from my personal experience or one off the news, but we did just read James Clavell's Shogun, and the whole intellectual and I guess you would say moral spirit driving that is the changes that Japan underwent with the introduction of Western technology. The samurai class ruled it under the Bushido Code, which is all about, face-to-face, hand-to-hand combat. You have a challenger and you take them down with the sword. But when you introduce guns into the mix, suddenly cowards can have the upper hand. Peasants can revolt against, the aristocratic people. It's a total the introduction of new technologies is an upheaval upon the morals and the kind of unwritten and written codes of that society. There's no reason to think that would be any different in our society or every society.
And I think there's a lot of onus on the individual actors, because in Shogun, the people who are training with guns are thinking, okay, if we don't train with guns, if we don't have an infantry, we can't win. We have fewer people. Whatever we represent as far as the culture, even though we're using guns and might be in our own way ending Bushido, we think that we should prevail. We think that we should win. We're going to train with guns. Otherwise, these other bad guys are going to win. So the people who have that pressure to compete often will take up the new technology and help advance it, almost like a what's that called? A host and a parasite relationship. But
yeah,
I feel like now with ChatGPT, lots of people are saying, well, I give, or any AI, generative AI, I give it the prompts. I also edit the prompts. I also give it feedback, and I also tell it what to do. So whatever I do with it, whatever it produces is actually my intellectual property, or at least my ideas, and I can publish it myself. But I think years ago, we never would have thought that. If you ask someone else, I guess you could publish under, have a ghostwriter, but basically it's a ghostwriter.
And I will say that I think that the idea you're expressing is still quite controversial to many, many people, even if it's not quite controversial to you and I at this cultural moment.
Well, which side are you on? Are you saying you can do it and have a ghostwriter without acknowledging it and saying you did create that? Or are you saying the opposite?
Well, I mean, not even talking about ghostwriting, just talking about the use of ChatGPT within one's creative work or as part of one's creative workflow. I don't see it as any different your example is using a ghostwriter, but not crediting them. That's definitional ghostwriting. But maybe another example is having but the other example is like a 18th century fine artist who has a workshop make their pieces under their supervision. I don't see it as fundamentally of a different logic. Now, that being said, if you just say, make me a blah, 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 write me an essay on blah, 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 you're not going to get a good or interesting or personally meaningful essay. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the usage of AI and other creative or generative systems to add texture, depth, critique, feedback, editing, et cetera, to work that has already taken shape or will iteratively develop over time.
See, I was on the opposite side personally for my own creation, but now I like this idea that you've pointed out of these old workshops, especially Renaissance workshops, where you have other people doing a lot of the work, and maybe even Shakespeare, working with the actors, working with other people. It's kind of a group effort often. Something still feels different, but the idea then is you leave behind the artifact, and that is the main important thing. And really, who created what percentage of that artifact? Does it matter so much, or is it the artifact and at least there's a name attached to it? But when I have tried to use ChatGPT or any kind of AI for generation, I feel like looking back at that work, I don't connect with it anymore, and it feels dead to me. So I can't continue it. I'll try and work with something and say, do this, here's mine. Can you organize my ideas? I've even given it all of my own ideas and said, can you please organize these into an outline? But then looking at it, somehow going through that process, it no longer feels alive to me and I don't want to pursue it. So that's a personal thing though. But I am very interested to see if we are changing our morals through this, or if we're just realizing it's no different than it was 400 years ago, where the painters were, saying, I did this, even though it was 4 people doing this. And now, if it's you and an AI doing it, is that really different from the past, I guess? It's just a new technology. It looks shinier, it looks newer, it feels like a new experience, but it's not a new experience. So then, do you think his outrage, I guess, this in this story, is the outrage acceptable? The outrage, he's been arrested and he's been given the death sentence for not a good reason, but is there a reasonable outrage at the very idea itself of technology changing human society and changing morals so completely? Should he rebel against what he feels is moral change?
Well, I feel like the rebellion doesn't come from the idea of technology changing society, but rather the rebellion comes from the direction in which this particular technology has changed society and morality. Because I think that he wouldn't complain about the invention of the typewriter changing society or the printing press. You know what I mean? Like those kinds of things I don't think he's quite worried about, but I think he is quite worried about this invention. I would love to be on a fly on the wall in which he really honed in on the idea of blood types and the discovery of blood types as being like the moment everything went wrong. But yeah, I do think that it is this invention changing society, not all invention, that he's mad. He's big mad about.
Big mad about. But I guess what I'm wondering is, same thing with H.P. Lovecraft, is it a fear of allowing technology to go too far or being led by it, so we just do what it wants? In this case of, well, it's a good use for something and we can keep pursuing it, pushing it, and we just lower the bar a little bit. Is that what is going bad here? How scary is the future? To Niven, it's very scary, but do you feel reading this story, does it make you fear the future?
Well, I like the turn of phrase you had, which was the technology having like I already blanked on the exact wording, but you said the technology has like a logic or a desire of its own. And I like the idea of technology having some kind of agency, like the existence of certain technology implies a certain desire for us to act in certain ways with which we can then utilize that technology better. That being said, the fact that we're now 50 years out from when this story was written and it hasn't quite turned out this way, I think is somewhat of a problem for the story. Not necessarily as an artistic piece, but as in terms of the efficacy of its warning. You know what I mean? Like as an SF piece, it doesn't matter whether the scary bit came true or not. But as a warning, seeing how, his future, the future that he imagined actually played out, it makes me say, I think we're okay for the next 50 years.
So it's a little bit Boy Who Cried Wolf. Maybe. It's a little bit attention getting. A warning for no reason.
Hey, but you know what? Maybe the right people read this story at the right time and it averted the future because
could be
some doctors and lawmakers said, should we harvest the organs of criminals? And they said, remember Niven. Remember Niven's warning.
Niven's Law.
Yes.
He brings up a lot of things that he says have changed morality greatly. He says dynamite, gunpowder, the printing press, the cotton gin, modern advertising techniques, psychology. And then it seems that he has a personal grudge that's somewhat unreasonable. He says, consider the automobile. It is now immoral to go home at all after a New Year's Eve party, which sounds like someone screaming, saying, you can't arrest me for drunk driving. I'll do what I want.
Yeah.
But
I had a moment of did I read that afterward? And then and then when you said that line, I was like, oh yeah, I remember. I do remember that.
Yes. Angry Niven at that point.
I'll say this. I'll say that I think Niven is interesting and I think he's a clear thinker. And just because he's wrong doesn't mean he's a bad writer. And I think that this is one of the few authors that we've read in this anthology where I say, yeah, without hesitation, I would read more from this person. Like a
Let's
full
read some more Niven.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Not as high on the list as other people, but I feel confident that if we picked out a Niven book, it would be sharp. You know what I mean?
Oh, so sharp it might cut out our kidneys.
Gosh, we're coming up on halfway through this book. Yeah, I've been happy with this story and the one before it. I'm excited to see where we go from here, what we see, what we learn, and what new authors we discover for ourselves. So, yeah, talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.